Masechet Nedarim Daf Nun Zayin. The entire Amud Aleph is a long Mishnah, and then we'll see the Gemara on it on Amud Bet. Kunam perot ha'elu alai. Kunam hen alpi. Kunam hen lefi. Asur bechilufehen ubigidulehen. Mishnah teaches that if a person makes a vow using a more general formula, we'll contrast this in a second with just eating. He says, these fruits are prohibited to me, kunam, like a korban. Or even if he says they're prohibited to my mouth, or on my mouth, or to my mouth. In that case, the item itself is prohibited in its totality, kind of like someone is making it hekdesh. If I take something and make it hekdesh, I'll say a fruit, and even if I plant it and then it grows into a new fruit, the whatever gidulehen, whatever grows from it, also is prohibited. And chilufehen means if I exchange it for something else, because hekdesh, its own value is hekdesh, if I exchange it for something else, the monetary value, whatever it substitutes for it, will also will become hekdesh. And so this type of korban, where I'm saying the fruit itself is prohibited, that prohibits not only its replacement, but also what grows from it. In contrast, she'ani ochel, she'ani to'em, mutar bechilufehen ubigidulehen. However, if I say this fruit is prohibited for me to eat or to taste, in that case, I am not making the entirety of the fruit itself, its entity, prohibited to me, but only the aspect of it that has to do with eating. So then I can't eat it itself. But if I have some apples, I exchange them for oranges. Or if I plant them and something else grows, the thing that grows is something new and that I am allowed to have benefit from. I am not eating the original item. The chidush here of alpi and lifi is that even though to my mouth or upon my mouth does suggest that it's going to be used for eating, still that doesn't matter. That's still included in the more general formula of this fruit is prohibited for me. Even if I say alpi for my mouth, it's not limited only to eating. However, if it says explicitly, I'm not going to eat this fruit, then it's only the aspect of eating that fruit that's prohibited, but a replacement or something that grows from it is permitted. Now, this last statement is qualified. Bedavar shezaro kaleh. Aval bedavar she'en zaro kala afilu gidulin asurin. It's only permitted for me to eat. Let's say I have an apple and I plant it in the ground, and now the apple withers away. All that's left is a seed. The seed also withers away and crumbles up, and then sprouts a new tree. So there, in the new tree, in the new fruit, there is nothing left of that original apple or apple seed. So that's why if I say shani ochel, what I'm going to eat, what I'm going to taste, then I would be permitted to eat either the oranges that exchanging for it or the new thing that grows from it, because it is completely destroyed in its original. However, if I'm talking about, let's say, an onion, where I take the bulb of the onion and I plant it in the ground, and the onion itself sprouts, and the onion remains there, and then I would want to eat from it, that would be prohibited. The growths of that would be prohibited. Even though I only said that I'm going to eat, this is now growing from the original onion itself, and I said I'm not going to eat the original onion itself, and here the parts of that original onion still remain, and so therefore I cannot eat it. This is quite interesting because this would be a good source to research the question of artificial meat, where you take in one actual meat cell and then you grow artificial cells from it. So this could have relevance as to whether, depending on how it's made, is that original substance from that meat still there, and now it's just growing from it, or does that completely disintegrate, dissolve, and what's there is now something completely new? So that could make a big difference, and here would be a source for that distinction. Okay, ha'omed li'ishti kunam ma'aseh yadayich alai kunam hem alpi kunam hen lefi asur bechilufehen ubigidulehen. Okay, all this would be true if the object of your vow is not the fruit, but rather your wife. a husband tells his wife, like a korban will be the works of your hands. Now, although this is something that didn't come yet into existence, right? We saw before that you can attach the prohibition on her hands, which do exist, and therefore anything she makes with her hands, anything that she may sow or cook or harvest from the field, will be prohibited for me to get any benefit from. And even if he says on my mouth or to my mouth, suggesting that he's not going to eat it, in that case, the prohibition falls once again on the essence of the item, and therefore, even if she went and she harvested some apples, and then those are prohibited, and even if you switch them with oranges, because I made the vow on anything that she does, so then the essential value of what she has there is prohibited to me, like hekdesh, and just like hekdesh, something that replaces it would be prohibited, and also something that will grow from it will continue to be prohibited. However, if I say instead shani ochel shani otoem, I say anything that my wife does with her hands, I will not eat and I will not taste. In that case, I'm limiting the vow only to the eating and tasting of that, but not to all benefits from that item. So therefore, mutar bechilufehen begidulehen b'davar shezaro kaleh, aval davar she'en zaro kaleh afilu gidule gidulin asurin. In that case, I'm permitted to have a replacement. She prepared an apple pie, but then we replaced it, we traded it for a cherry pie, so that would be permitted because I just said I'm not going to eat. I only limited my prohibition to eating that apple pie. I'm not eating apple pie. I'm just eating something that was exchanged for its value. But that's okay in this limited vow, or something that grows from it. If there was a pit in there and the apple seed, that's something that totally gets destroyed if it would be replanted. Unlike if she harvested some onions and then those bulbs were replanted, then that would be something that is there in its original. It's just that it grew more, and that would be prohibited to eat even in this limited shani ochel formula. Okay, we're continuing now in the Mishnah with the wife cases. Shat osa eni ochel ad ha-pesach. Shat osa eni mitkaseh ad ha-pesach. If a husband tells his wife, anything that you make, any food that you make, I will not eat until Pesach. Right, from now, let's say it's Purim, and he says, from now until Pesach, I will not eat anything that any food that you make. Or anything that you make, I will not wear. Any clothing that you sew, I will not wear until Pesach. Now that time frame is going on his actions. I am not going to do this, right? Anything that you do, ever, I'm not going to use until Pesach. So in that case, the time limit goes on the husband's action, so that asta lifnei Pesach mutar lecho litkasot achar Pesach. If she made it before Pesach, doesn't matter when she makes it, even if she made it before Pesach, he is allowed to eat it or wear it after Pesach, because he only said that his vow is in force, that he will not use benefit from her food or from her clothing from now until Pesach. So that just means he can't eat it before Pesach, and he can't wear what she makes before Pesach. But after Pesach, that's it. The vow has a time limit, and there is no prohibition afterwards. So even though she might have made it before Pesach, well, she was allowed to make it before Pesach, just he was not allowed to benefit from it, and he didn't. And so you can put a time limit on, in this case, his action. But you could also do the other way around. Shat osa ad Pesach eni ochel, v'shat osa ad Pesach eni mitkaseh. Here he says, whatever you cook for me, whatever you cook before Pesach, I am not eating. Whatever clothing you make until Pesach, I am not wearing. In that case, it all depends on when she cooked or made the item. Asta lifnei Pesach asur lecho litkasot achar Pesach. If she made it before Pesach, then he is prohibited from it at any time, even after Pesach. So because he put the time limit frame on when she made it, if she made it before Pesach, it will be prohibited forever. If she makes it after Pesach, then it would be permitted. Good. Shat nehenit li ad Pesach im holechet at lebet abich ad hechag. Now we take that and we add one layer of complication. We add a condition. Condition is, a husband tells his wife, you cannot have any benefit from me from now until Pesach. Let's say it's Purim, right? From Purim to Pesach, no benefit from me if you go to your father's house from now until Sukkot. So this guy, he doesn't want his wife going to his in-laws. She spends too much time there. He wants her to stay at home, whatever the reason is. But the time frame for the if you go to your father's house, is much longer. It's from Purim all the way till Sukkot, right? 7 months. She's not allowed to go there. Even though the then part of it, the consequence, the prohibition, is only that she will not be able to have benefit from him from now until Pesach. So the consequences of this would be clear. If she decides to violate this vow, violate the if rather, and she triggers it, and she does go to her father's house before Pesach, well, that's the if. Though the if kicks in, and then is the consequence, she will be prohibited from any benefit from him until Pesach, right? Then the prohibition of the vow will kick in, even though that has a time limit. If before Pesach started, she didn't yet go to her father's house, but she did receive benefit from her husband, in that case, the if is still pending, right? Because the if part of it goes all the way till Sukkot, even though the consequence part is only till Pesach. So then it's pending on her action. Once she did receive benefit from her husband before Pesach, then it's going to be a problem for her if she goes to her father's house at any time before Sukkot. Because if she doesn't go to her father's house all the way until Sukkot, then it turns out it was just fine that she received benefit from her husband before Pesach, because then she will have never triggered the if. However, if she does go to her father's house at any point before Sukkot, then that will trigger the if, will trigger the prohibition of the then, and then retroactively it will turn out she was not allowed to go to benefit from her husband, and therefore if she did benefit from her husband before Pesach, and now at any point from Pesach on till Sukkot, she goes to her father's house, then she retroactively violates the vow, and she is guilty of a Bal Yachel, right? So this is an interesting case, because the if extends for a long time, actually extends past the consequence of the vow, the prohibition of the vow. So you have this really interesting consequence case where she has to, if she did do the violation part before Pesach, it's not a violation when she did it because she didn't yet go to her father's house. But if in the future, before Pesach, before Sukkot, she goes to her father's house, then it turns out she would not have been able to benefit from her husband, and she would violate. Okay, and now we flip around the short and long parts of the time period here. The husband says to his wife, you may not have any benefit from me from now until Sukkot, if you go to your father's house from now until Pesach. And once again, let's say they're at Purim at that point. So the point is, don't go to your father's house anytime from now till Pesach. And if you do, then you can't have any benefit from me from now all the way until Sukkot. So the consequences would be, if she does go to her father's house before Pesach, well, she doesn't violate anything. It's just that then she triggers the if clause. Therefore, that prompts the rest of the vow that there is a prohibition for her to go to have any benefit from him until Sukkot. As long as she doesn't benefit from him, she doesn't violate the vow. However, in any case, she is permitted to go to her father's house after Pesach, because after all, the entire prohibition, the if part of the if clause, was only that if you go to your father's house before Pesach. But the husband totally permitted her to go after Pesach, There was never any problem with that. And so she's always allowed to go after Pesach. Okay. האומר לאשתו, כונם מעשה ידייך עליי, כונם הם על פי, כונם הם לפי. Okay, we're going back to that clause of the Mishnah where a person says to his wife, your actions, anything that you produce is prohibited to me. Well, in that case, those things would be prohibited, even their replacements and even things that grow from it, because he's saying that the essence, the thing itself, is prohibited to him. All right, now we have a question. Ishmael ish kefar yama, v'amri la ish kefar dima. Ishmael, either from this place or that place, he'ela biyado, basal shakaro b'shbi'it unta'o b'sheminit, v'rabu gidulav alikaro. He has a very interesting question. He seems to be some kind of farmer, and he holds in his hand, there's two interpretations. He has a question about an onion. Either that he brought up a question, or maybe he actually brought up an onion, an actual onion, that this was the case. All right, I think it's more interesting if he's actually coming to the Bet Midrash and asking a question about this onion. The question is, you have an onion that was uprooted during the Shevi'it year, and therefore that has Kedushat Shevi'it. But then he replanted the onion in the 8th year, and now it grew, and the new growth is more than the original onion. So, should we follow the majority, which is new growth of the 8th year, and therefore is totally permitted, or do we say, well, it still has some of the 7th year growth, and therefore it would have Kedushat Shevi'it? Here was his question. Do we say that the new growth is permitted, and the original part of the onion bulb is going to remain prohibited? So since the majority is the new permitted growth is more than the original, do we say that the new do they remove the prohibition, and now it's all permitted, like 8th year growth, or do we not say that? Do we say that original is still there, and therefore whatever is original is still prohibited? Okay, that's his question. Ishmael asks Rabbi Ameh, and Rabbi Ameh did not have it in his hands, which here is not literal, because he's not holding any onion or anything. He didn't have the answer in his hands, but there's a nice parallelism that he comes with a question in his hands, maybe literally with an onion in his hands, and Rabbi Ameh has nothing in his hands, but he has no answer. But don't worry, this farmer is going to keep searching for an answer. Rabbi Napacha says, Pashat lamin hadad amar Rabbi Chanina terita'a amar Rabbi Yanai. He figured it out from this following statement of Rabbi Chanina terita'a, an interesting name. It could mean that maybe from the word three, Rabbi Chanina the third, or maybe from a place like Carthage. Okay, whatever his name means, he said, in the name of Rabbi Yanai, Basal shel teruma sheneta'o v'rabu gidulav al ikaro mutar. If you have an onion that is teruma, and therefore it's only a kohen can eat it, it's prohibited to anybody else. But you plant it, and now it grew a lot, and the new growth is more than the original. The whole thing is permitted, and therefore this would be the same thing. You had the original onion, which was Shevi'it, but now more of the growth is from the 8th year. Therefore, the whole thing should be permitted. Good, we have a great answer. But Rabbi Yirmiyah rejected it, or some say Rabbi Zerika told Rabbi Yitzchak Napacha, it's great you followed this one opinion of Rabbi Yanai, but you're going to leave two opinions and follow only one, right? You're going to follow just this minority opinion and ignore the other two opinions that would prohibit. Oh boy. Okay, so man nihu teren. Who are these other two opinions that would prohibit such a case? Damar Rabbi Abu Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Yalda shesibecha bizkena uba perot. Here we're talking about a vine that is prohibited. It's orla. but you take this young vine, yalda, meaning young vine, so that's why it's orla and prohibited, and you graft it onto a zikena, onto an old vine. The old vine is permitted because it's past 4 years of its growth. Uba pedot, on the young vine, there's some fruit on it. So the fruit on the young vine is orla, is prohibited. Even though the younger vine added 200 times the numbers of fruit after it was grafted, and it grows a lot of fruit, nevertheless, those original fruits that are on there are prohibited. So here you see a similar case where you have an original piece there that remains, that was prohibited, and even though it grows a lot more than that, we do not say that the new growth overpowers the old growth and kind of makes it now one big mixture of permitted. No, we say the old growth that was prohibited remains prohibited. So you see that this is opinion number one that is stringent. That's Rabbi Yochanan against Rabbi Yanai. And the second one, Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, this is Rabbi Yonatan, Basal shenetao becherem, v'nekar hakerem, asur. We take we take an onion and we put it in a vineyard. Now this is kilayim, so this is all prohibited. But then we uproot the vineyard and we leave the onion. So now we uprooted everything. And so now whatever new will grow should be permitted. And so now the onion grows after that, right? After you removed all the vines, and so all the new growth is permitted, even if the new growth is more than the original onion that was planted in prohibition. Nevertheless, it is prohibited. So here we go, same case, similar case. And Rabbi Yonatan says we do not say the new growth allows you to eat the original, but rather the original remains prohibited. So we have a problem here. Now this is going to be 2 against 1. To say to Yishmael, sorry, right, he's still holding the onion in his hands. Your onion is a problem. We have to consider it Shavi'it food. But Yishmael, the farmer, did not give up. Hadad atale kamed Rabbi Ameh. Rabbi Ameh was the original one he went and asked the question to in the first place, right? And Rabbi Ameh, he didn't know the answer back then, but he did his homework. And so he came back. So he came back to the Rabbi Ameh. Ufashid lemin hadad amar Rabbi Yitzchak amar Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Ameh was able to figure out an answer based on something Rabbi Yochanan himself said. Even though we just quoted Rabbi Yochanan that prohibits, but we can derive a different answer here. Litra besalim shetikena uzra'a mit aseret lefi kula. We have a litra. It's a certain measurement. It's a pretty small measurement, and it's in its own volume. But it might be talking about a litra of silver, which would be a large sum. So that means probably means the amount of onions that you could buy with a litra of money. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You took this number of onions and you took teruma and maaser. And then after you separated it properly, so technically the next thing you would do is give the teruma maaser to the Kohen and Levi, and then you'd eat the rest. But instead, this guy didn't do that. He took the whole litra, all the bitzalim, and he planted them. He took all these onions and he replanted them, both the teruma and the maaser and the chulin, and he put it all back into the ground. And now it all grew into more than was there originally. So what should he do now? The halacha is he has to give maaser on all the new growth. All the old growth and new growth, everything that's there, he has to give maaser on it. So here we're being machmir, and we're saying even though you took already maaser from the original crops that before you planted them, nevertheless, we're not going to consider that maaser to be anything, and you have to take maaser again on everything that's here. Almao tan gidulin v'batelin ikar. So what do we see from here? That the whatever grows, the new growth, neutralizes or cancels out the original. It's true, in the original you already took maaser, but now that they grew more than was their original, everything that you did before is canceled out, and you take maaser for the entirety. And so here the Biyameh is able to prove that, according to the Yochanan himself, yes, we follow the new growth. However, we reject this. Dilma lechumra shaneh. First of all, we'd have a contradiction between this statement of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yochanan right over here. But independent of that, this is not a good proof, because this is lechumra. Here we're saying you can't rely on that ma'aseh and assume, oh, I already took maaser on that, so I only have to take maaser on the new one. Here we're saying the new growth, we're not sure what it is. So you know what? Because we have to take maaser, maybe we have to take maaser on the old growth. We're not sure. Maybe it does not nullify the old. So to be stringent, we're going to require you to take more maaser on everything, the new and the old growth. But maybe that's because we're being stringent, because we don't really know what to do with it. But in the opposite case, for leniency, we would not follow the new growth for leniency. And therefore, in your case, Ishmael, where you have the original is prohibited and the new is eighth year and is permitted, we would also be unsure, and we have to assume also for stringency. And in this case, stringency would be to consider the new growth as not part of the old, and it does not nullify the old, and therefore the old growth remains prohibited and is not reconstituted, not redefined by the new growth. So in other words, we can't use this as a proof, because perhaps we only follow the new growth, which is more, and consider the old as part of the new, only lechumra, only for astringency, but it doesn't mean that we would also follow it for leniency. And we're going to continue on the next daf with further proofs regarding this very question. So you can see that even this continuation will have a lot of applications to stem cells and artificial meat, because we want to now know, first of all, if the original is made from pig, and now we have new, right? So that would be for stringency, but it could also be other cases where the original is kosher meat, and now we just want to know, is what grows from it a parve or considered meat or dairy, right? And so there could be cases of both stringency or leniency. And so these are all very good sources that when we decide that halacha, we'll have to take into account. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.